found why we are Christians. My name is Kent Philpott, and this is an interview, conversational interview about how a person became a Christian, and we're going to be talking with David Leone. Hiya, David. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
All right. You came up here from Santa Cruz today.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Now, let's get started. Okay. Where were you born?
San Jose, California, at the Kaiser Hospital there over in Bascom.
Okay. Oh, good old Kaiser Hospitals. Yeah. Give us a little background about yourself.
Sure, yeah. I grew up in San Jose. My mom and dad divorced pretty early. I was 8. Real dysfunctional. It's two people that should have never gotten married to each other. They're both troublemakers. My dad was, involved with all kinds of nefarious stuff. And it was your typical kind of pre-Silicon Valley San Jose where it was orchards and farms and racing cars and nonsense. And so my dad was kind of one of those guys. And my mom was from a Yugoslavian family, and she was a rebel, and she got pregnant early with me. And my dad got in trouble for statutory rape and everything else. And I'm named after him.
You're named after him?
I'm David Jr.
All right, you're David Jr. So you went to high school in San Jose area?
I went to many high schools. I actually went to 13 different schools.
Wow.
Before I dropped out in the 10th grade.
You dropped out in the 10th grade?
I dropped out. I started working at a Chinese food restaurant, making $1 an hour. Then I became a busboy for this restaurant called Mr. P's, run by the mafia at the time. They would have their meetings there, and I was a busboy, and I worked 16 hours a day. And it was later on I tried to go back to high school. I went to Oak Grove High for a little bit, Willow Glen High, dropped out again, went to work for Bullock's Distribution, repairing furniture, and then just joined the Navy.
You joined the Navy?
Yes, sir.
What'd you do in the Navy?
Well, since I didn't have the diploma to get an A school, so I had to become an apprentice, bosun's mate. But I could see now God's hand. I wasn't a Christian back then, but a door opened up for me to actually join the air wing, and I became a search and rescue crewman, anti-submarine warfare operator, trained with special forces and all this stuff, and did a bunch of fun, amazing stuff in the Navy with This was during the Cold War. This was during the Reagan era. So Russian subs was a big deal, and then just did a bunch of search and rescue and all these other cool operations.
You were just getting properly trained to be the kind of Christian you are today, David. Sounds to me like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I spent my years in the military too as a medic. So, background, did you remember going to church as a kid at all?
Never went to church. Never. That was a big deal. My father was a hardcore atheist. My mother was a spiritualist.
And spiritualist?
Oh, yeah.
What did she do?
She's obsessed with psychics. They had the psychic fair every year over at the Pruneyard, at the shopping center there. And she was completely immersed with psychics. In fact, if you ever heard of the Montel Williams show, they had Sylvia Brown was the psychic. Well, her sister is Rita Brown. And that was my mom. Rita and Sylvia Brown are both from San Jose, their whole family. And so my mom was good friends with Rita Brown, and so we'd go, and Rita was the more intense psychic. Sylvia was more the showboater, but Rita was the hardcore psychic that we would go and see all the time. And so I was immersed in the psychic world initially. And then even when I was a kid, my mom was this person. She'd work all night, and then at midnight, she would take us to the Lions Club, and I'd be in my pajamas with my little feet, like those little onesies. And at midnight, we would go to the Lions Club, and then psychics would be there reading auras and all this other kind of stuff, and then they would start training me as a little kid in my pajamas to start reading auras and how to start, being involved with the occultic arts.
Wow. That's highly unusual. I don't know if I've heard a story like that, David.
That's right.
Did it impact you? Had any spiritual impact on you at all that you're aware of?
Oh yeah, completely, because even when I was in the Navy, I kind of walked away from that stuff when I went in the Navy. But then it's interesting how I became best friends. I got in trouble in the Navy. I had to work in a bakery for a while on the USS Kitty Hawk. And the guy that was running the bakery was heavily involved with the occult. He would break off all of this Buddhist occultic knowledge, all this kind of stuff, and we just became so tight, and I was immersed back into the occult world because before I joined the Navy, I was studying the occult in a kind of a scholarly way too. I was studying the Golden Dawn, Israel Regardie stuff, Aleister Crowley stuff. So I went into the intellectualism of it too.
Do you find a close connection between some forms of Buddhism and the occult?
Oh yeah, absolutely, there is. I just got back recently from Sri Lanka, and their entire government is built on the Buddhist concept in the Sinhala. Every year I was there for what's called the ceremony called the Petaheta. And the Petaheta is like where they bring up Buddha's tooth. And the first time I went and saw Buddha's tooth, I was in the Navy.
They brought up what?
Buddha's tooth.
Spell that word.
Tooth, tooth.
Buddha? Okay.
They have his tooth.
Have a tooth?
Tooth, right?
That belonged to who?
Buddha.
Gautama?
Yeah, Siddhartha.
So they say that this was his tooth.
This was his tooth, and therefore whoever has Buddha's tooth has political reigns over that country. So that's why they had a 30-year civil war where you had the Tamil Tigers, the Tamil Indians that were Hindu battling with the Sinhala Buddhists that were fighting them for 30 years. And why I was there 30 years ago is in the Navy. They were having a civil war that just got started. So I was in a helicopter squadron, and we landed right there in a cricket field. And they executed 100 people that day. It was in 1985, I was there. During the beginning of their civil war ends 30 years later, and God opens up the door for me to go into Sri Lanka to do evangelism and to go like Dambula and these other Buddhist temples to share with the guys that were running these temples about Christ.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, a total
I never
full
heard
circle.
anybody like you before, David.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I'm so glad to talk with you, I got to tell you. Did you actually graduate from high school?
No.
You didn't graduate?
And I got in the Navy, which was the reason I got in the Navy, because you're going to ask, how do you get in the Navy if you didn't graduate? They were so low on people signing, because it was a volunteer thing, is that they were for 2 weeks, letting people in from anywhere. So when I went into boot camp, it was all guys from the ghetto. It was all guys from these urban kind of areas, and so it was a whole other boot camp than the other ones. They even made comment about it, saying this is a whole another group of people coming in, because they needed people to sweep the floors, to chip off rust, to paint, and that's what I was doing. I initially was painting boiler rooms.
Did you have any ideas about Christianity, or did you have any understanding of who Jesus was at that point?
Sure. Yeah, well, I had 2 experiences with Christianity before I became a Christian. They were both kind of a little bit negative. And it's not to put any blame on it, but people can be weird, you know. And so we had people live across the street from us, and the kids were all going to like Vacation Bible School. They were going to a good Baptist church. But we'd go over to their house, and then they would have all these little salamanders all crucified in their backyard, like literally 20, 30 salamanders all on crosses being crucified and dying. And it was just weird stuff. And then we spray painted with that fake snow on Christmas, Merry Xmas, because we had a small window. And they tried to throw a sickle through our window because they said it was blasphemy to have the letter X there for Christ. And we didn't know anything about it.
Now this is a little bit weird. These people proclaim themselves as Christians?
Yeah. So then this is during a time when you would see on TV like kids standing on street corners with a Bible yelling. I thought Christianity would turn people crazy. So that's because they had all these anger issues and stuff like that. So I was thinking, I don't want to be a Christian. And the second encounter I had with Christianity was my best friend was Jewish. He was Russian Jew, but he was from a very troubled background, and his mother killed herself while on the phone with him. She's in a mental institute. She literally took a bunch of pills and died while on the phone with him. And then later on, his dad was one of the major kind of digital kind of pioneers in Silicon Valley. And he had my friend Kenny and his sister Lori sit across from him while he put a 45 to his head and blew his brains out in front of them. And so Kenny ended up in foster care, and his foster parents were Christians. And so Kenny was Russian Jew. I'm coming from the weird background I'm coming from, and they were taking him to church. I just remember that they had a chili kind of cook-off or something at the church.
A chili cook-off.
In the church, and then so it was weird to be with Kenny with all the stuff he was going through, and everything seemed very superficial to me. They couldn't really minister to the kind of world that Kenny came from, or I even came from. And so it seemed very superficial. They were nice as can be, but it seemed very superficial to me. So I never, ever foresaw myself becoming a Christian, ever.
So you had not heard what we would call the gospel at
No.
this point, David.
No, I never stepped foot in a church, never heard never even opened the Bible, I don't think I even touched the Bible.
What's next? What happened next in your life?
Well, God uses crises sometimes, or whatever.
A crisis?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, what was happening was I got out of the Navy, and I ended up working for Costco as a forklift driver, which was hard to do because there was tons of cannery workers there. So there's 200 people that applied to be forklift drivers, and so I applied to be a forklift driver. I'm out of the Navy, and I somehow, by a miracle, became one of the forklift drivers, and I got involved with a guy named Ken, a different Ken, and he was involved with things that I was more used to in my prior life in the Navy, which is my dad was part of the biker scene. A lot of my friends, their dads and uncles were all bikers for the Hells Angels, which was a huge part of the San Jose culture back then.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah, because the biggest chapter for the Hells Angels was San Jose. There was hundreds and hundreds of Hells Angels out there. So we lived in these poor neighborhoods, and a lot of these guys were, Hells Angel biker kind of scene. My dad was around all of that. So this guy, Ken Bermudez, when I got out of the Navy, that was his scene, South San Jose stoner biker scene. And so I got involved with Ken, and before you know it, hey, his uncle and this guy, they're cooking up some meth, over by Chuck E. Cheese on Cruiser Road, and this and that, and the other thing, and I got to make a delivery. Do you want to go and make a delivery? And before I knew it, I'm sucked back into that world, and they were doing stuff like making meth and then putting it in Duncan Hines cake boxes, glue gunning it, and then we deliver it by the case. And before I knew it, I was just kind of doing this because I was friends with Ken. And then one day I couldn't go, and that was the one day that the DEA busted everybody. Everybody. Ken was in for over 10 years. He had 10,000 hits of LSD, had all those Duncan Hines. And so that was a bullet I dodged. And then at the time I was doing video documentary work. I got out of the Navy, I bought a camera, and I was doing in San Francisco a little documentary on prostitution and doing a documentary on street gangs in San Jose. And there's this street gang, I won't mention it. But anyway, they were confessing to murders while I had the camera. And I said I'd blur out their face and change their voice. And they were confessing to murders. And they were getting high with PCP in the backyard, confessing these murders and stuff. So I left to go finish up the documentary with prostitution in San Francisco. I was gone for 5 weeks. The guy named Mike, who got me in with this group, says, "You can't come back." I said, "Why?" They said, "They think you're a cop. They confess all these crimes to you on camera. You take off for 5 weeks. There's a contract out for your life." I'm like, "What? I am anything but a cop." But they were like, they're paranoid. They're freaking out. So that was happening along with I was, at the time, married. And my wife, I got reconnected with my dad again, started having an affair with my wife.
Say that again?
My father was having an affair with my wife, giving her cocaine. And he's a hardcore atheist and stuff. So all this...
Who, watching this program, is going to believe that?
Right.
Now, let me take it, let's run it back a little bit.
Yeah, there's more to the story.
You said a lot of stuff very quick. Okay. Now, you got married to a lady. Mm-hmm. Did you have any kids?
No.
Okay. You got married. Mm-hmm. And then at some point, behind your back, your father was having an affair with your wife.
He's a therapist. He's a psychologist. And he's got his PhD in psychology. One of the reasons...
Is he living?
Yeah, I just recently went and visited him and gave him kind of an interesting message about the gospel. Yeah, we will touch back on that because that's very fascinating. And what it is that she had all these... She was molested. She's from LA. She's from Hollywood, actually, and West Hollywood. And so I was in the Navy at the time. We started dating. We met over in Big Bear ski thing. We got connected, and she had these issues because of her early molestation. Her father abandoned her at 6. Stepdad came in. She was molested. So she had all these issues around male authority and stuff like that. And my father was playing on that because he's a massive exploiter of people. And so he's a brilliant guy and has done a lot of good work in other areas, but he's kind of a predator. That's the honest truth. And so, he was playing on that part of her. And for me, I was not playing on that part of her. I was about being a part of the healing in her life. And that was, this whole thing, marry someone to rescue them, bad idea. Because I married her to rescue her, only to deliver her to the hands of a predator that was my father. And I have no anger towards him other than I know the damage he caused her by sending her down that path. That completely messed up a bunch of stuff. So all of this was happening. I've confronted my father about this. She goes off, has an affair with a guy at her work too, because I'm even willing to restore. And, you know, I had my own issues of codependency, of like, oh no, Cal, forgive this. We're both wounded people, da 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 da. And so it became toxic, and it just became so ridiculous because you have to remember, I'm helping to run meth for the Hell's Angel with this guy, Ken. So they would pay me by giving me giant bags of meth. And so I'm doing meth, which I wasn't doing before. So, you know, all the demonic insanity. And then I'm like finding out, I'm throwing I Ching coins and all this other kind of stuff to find out what's going on with so-and-so. I was getting paranoid. And all this demonic activity started happening in my life. Huge. And I mean, believe me, I'm minimizing the story. People might think I'm exaggerating. I don't need to exaggerate. I am actually truly not giving all the craziness that was really honestly there. It's
Now,
it's
I
real.
have, in my past, David, I have spoken with people who had had similar experiences. So it's not something I haven't heard before. But I know that many people watching will not have been that way, not have heard that. You know, I was street preacher in Haight-Ashbury for 3 years, San Francisco. I was an old beatnik. I was a follower of who rode on the road.
Jack Kerouac.
Jack, yeah, I was one of those guys. Traveled around, got in all kind of trouble, and had trouble getting into the Air Force because I had 2 felony convictions against me. But they were at a time.
Am I allowed to be associated with felons right now?
At a time, they were so interested. I got my my record expunged because they were so anxious to get people into the military.
Sure.
I just got in.
When was this? I'm curious.
This is 1961.
Oh, wow.
When I went in. I was in there for 65.
Sure.
So, but anyway, so I'm familiar with stories, and I know this kind of stuff can happen. So I just want to let people know this stuff goes on.
Yeah, it does.
It goes on. Okay, continue the story, David. This is great.
Well, so how did I come to a knowledge of Christ? Well, it goes a little bit darker, but I don't want to get too much into it, but I'll share this little tiny part, is that I was obviously in a crisis, betrayal from my own father, my wife, you know, on and on, the whole thing of dodging this major bullet, finding out that there's a contract because these guys were freaking out. It wasn't good. It just wasn't good. And so things became very weird. And so you go to what comforts you. And the occult and my studies in the occult was always this go-to place for me. And the activity was becoming major. There was 2 people that heard about me because I was doing all these psychic readings and stuff like that, that heard about me from LA. They drove all the way from LA, and they're saying to me that you have this power about you, that you're at like wizard kind of level stuff. I'm like, what? You know, like I was doing to help people. To me, I didn't have any ambition. It was just more of a, hey, I'm just, you know, seeking and I'm helping people and stuff. But it got so weird that I had a friend of mine. She had been a friend forever since we were kids. And she's saying, hey, can I have a friend stay at your place? You know, and he's a friend of mine and my husband's, but he's in town from Utah. And I said, Moab, Utah. And I said, sure, you could stay there. I walk into my house one day, and they were in bed together on my futon. So she was cheating on her husband with the guest she asked me to stay in my house. And I don't know why, but that was the camel that broke the camel. That was the straw that broke the camel's back right there.
Saying those words, that's the straw that brought you to a place of saying something's really wrong here.
Yeah, I mean, so much that I couldn't take it anymore. I was done. And I was so distraught, and sadly enough, at this time, I had a pistol grip 20 gauge Mossberg shotgun. And I took it out of the closet, and I put my head on the barrel. I had the butt of it as a pistol grip, so it was short. And I put my finger on the trigger, and I said, if I ever needed courage, it's right now. To me, it was going to be a courageous act to actually just blow my brains out right there. And so literally, this is about, what, 12:30 at night or something? I forget. It's between 11:45 and 12:30. It was right around that period. I remember putting my head to the gun and just putting my thumb on the trigger, going, now, now, now. And at that time, there was a knock on the door. And of all the people that were there, it was my mother. And my mother has never visited me ever, wherever I've lived. And even after that, I built a house out by Bass Lake and all this other kind of stuff. She never visited me. Never in her life has she ever visited my home. I've invited her hundreds of times. Mom, come, see the place. No. But out of the blue, after around midnight, she's knocking on my door, and I didn't even know she knew where I lived. And so I put the gun away. I go and answer the door. Mom, what are you doing here? She's all saying, hey, kiddo. Kiddo? She barely. Last time I was called kiddo, I was like probably 10. Hey, kiddo, you want to go get something to eat? I'm like, Mom, it's midnight. Yeah, I know. I'm like, all right. I'm thinking, okay, what's going on here? We go to this place called Coco's, and I'm having a hot chocolate. She's eating. She's bringing up all these childhood memories. Like, oh, remember when you had a drafting board? Remember when, your dog PG, because we bought a dog, we're going to go pay our PG&E bill. And we always had our lights shut off a bunch of times, but we bought this puppy instead. And so the lights were shut off, so we named the dog PG&E. But we shortened it to PG. And so, remember that? I'm like, yeah. She's all saying, well, I'm like, why are you doing this? Like, because we didn't even get along. I don't know, And so before I knew it, I said, you don't know what this means to me. She says, yes, I do. I'm like, no, you don't. You have no idea. And to the day she died, she never knew that I was about to end it.
Yeah.
She didn't know. So it was there that I finally said, if there's a God. To me, because even I'm not a Jehovah's Witness at all, but a Jehovah's Witness came up to me right after the next day and said, do you know what I believe? I believe that God is a person. And I thought, how limiting. God, if there is a God, is an infinite being that you cannot personify. You cannot use anthropomorphism as a way to comfort yourself, to make God a person for you. God is an infinite anything if it's a he, she, or whatever. So to me, that was a lowbrow kind of a thing. But right before I put my key in the door, it was playing in my head saying, but if God is infinite, can't God manifest as a person if you're infinite? And I go, maybe I'm the closed-minded one, whatever. And I opened the door. And from there, I'm thinking, well, if you're real, then I'm going to start crying out to you. And that is a 4-month period of crying out endlessly as one thing was starting to happen. And I won't go into details. As I say, there's things that I won't talk about on air that really were happening is madness incarnate. I mean, there was a spirit. I'll tell you this much. There is another realm beyond this world, and I have no doubt about it.
So you were experiencing what I would refer to as being called. Mm-hmm. Like Paul says in Romans 8:30, those whom he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. Those he justified, he also glorified. I would, when I was hearing you, I would say, you're in the process of being called.
Yeah.
And strange things happen. Not unheard of. Was there one or two you could describe, maybe briefly?
Of God's intervention?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, there's one so I go back to work. I mean, I'm just crying out to him day and night. I'm listening to piano music, putting candles around my bathtub, taking baths. I just need the sense of comfort and water, and I was not comforted. I was absolutely agitated. I couldn't live in my own skin. I'm crying out to God. And I'm going to work every morning, waking up at 3:30, going to work at Costco, driving a forklift, doing my thing. And then, so I'm taking a ton of vitamins and herbs to try to calm down. And so I'm kind of getting equalized some level, but I'm just spiritually so agitated. If there's a God, please, if you're out there. And I'm driving my forklift. It's about 4:15 in the morning. I'll never forget this. And I'm just about to put the product up on the top steel. They have in Costco, they have all that steel. It's way up there. And I go and I put it up there. And just as I'm pulling my forks out, the whole warehouse lights up. And I mean lights up, this golden-like light going way past the warehouse. And at the top was this like diamond-like light. And it was this voice that said, David, my way and my way only. And it was, some people think, oh, how insane. No. It was the most sane moment of my whole life. It was not a voice. It was the voice. And I was a non-Christian. And I knew it was the voice of the God of the Bible. It was David, my way and my way only. It was the most sane. It was the voice. It was the voice that all of nature responds to, all of his creation responds to. It's the voice. And I'll never forget, I had a blue and green plaid shirt on. And as those forks were coming down, I was like, I knew what he meant. He meant Christianity. I'm thinking, wow, of all the things for me to be able. So I'm now driving my forklift, and then I don't say anything to anybody. I look extroverted, but back then I was super introverted. And so I'm driving my forklift just going, wow, what an answer. So I'm driving my forklift and I'm dropping off pallets of product to get stocked in the freezer. And the guy that I knew, his name's Danny, out of nowhere says, God loves you. He's not what? So I keep dropping off stuff in there. Every time I go by, God loves you. I stopped my forklift. I said, Danny, why are you saying this to me? He says, I don't know. It just keeps popping out of my mouth. I said, you're not a Christian. He says, well, I mean, I recently gave my life to Christ. Just had a daughter. So I started going to a Bible study. But every time you drive by, God is telling me, say I love you to this man, that I love him. Just tell him. So I said, are you doing this to other people? He says, no, just God keeps telling me, tell this guy I love him. So every time you pop by, he keeps telling me. So, yeah, isn't this crazy? You want to hear an interesting part that I don't share? The very next weekend, the next Monday after the weekend, Danny's not there anymore. What happened to Danny? Did he move? He just had a daughter. No, he died. Spinal meningitis. I was the only person he shared Christ with, and he died.
Wow.
And so there was this sense of wow, it's like God put that man there to confirm something. So one last thing, can I talk about the Haight-Ashbury real quick? Well, wait a minute, I think we're down to
No, keep going.
Okay, so I'm in the, I used to like hanging out in the Haight-Ashbury. I had an uncle who lived on the corner of Haight and Ashbury. His name Leonard. And he was there through the 60s and everything. And so I'm hanging up the Haight-Ashbury, and I go to an anarchist bookstore. They had an anarchist bookstore out there. So I go to this anarchist bookstore, and I'm looking for the anarchist cookbook, the anarchist cookbook. And they said, no, you got to send for that.
Cookbook?
The anarchist cookbook.
The anarchist cookbook.
Because my friend told me about it, the guy who I was in the Navy with that was the baker and stuff. And I'm like, they're all saying, hey, listen, the FBI monitors people that buy that book, so when it's ordered. So.
Okay, now, hold that thought. I am gonna stop the program right now, and we're going to begin. So you got to see the next edition of this. Talking here with David Leone. So be looking for the next edition of Why We Are Christians. David's going to be telling us a lot more stuff. Until then, so long.